Okay, hello and welcome to my first in my series of TLDR videos. Today we're going to attack a very simple problem: how to install NixOS. Well, of course, that can be quite an expansive thing, but today we're going to do the absolute minimum that you would require to get it onto your computer. We're going to install using the minimal ISO, and we're only going to install text command line only, nothing graphical, just to show how simply this can be done in a fully manual way. And we will build upon this in future videos. This is just the absolute bare bones. So here I am, for starters, at nixos.org, and I'm clicking the download button here. And the thing that you see at the top is the package manager, which is, a big part of Nix. But we're actually going to scroll down to here where it says NixOS, the Linux distribution. Now, you can, of course, use a graphical ISO image, and that will do a lot of the work for you. But we're interested in learning some things today. So we're going to do the minimal ISO image. And here you have the options for 64-bit Intel/AMD, which is what we're going to choose. Also available as a 64-bit ARM build as well. You'll be aware if you're on ARM. If you don't know which you're on, then you're certainly on Intel or AMD. So I would go ahead and download that, and we're now going to jump into this command line here where I have a tool called Nemu. Now, Nemu is a virtual, it's a terminal user interface for QEMU, basically. So it allows us to manage virtual machines. I'm going to do this entire installation on a virtual machine. You, of course, most likely will be doing it on real hardware. So you would want to burn that ISO to a disk or put it onto a USB stick. There are instructions on the NixOS website on how to do that. If you give me just a moment, I'm going to set up this virtual machine, and then you'll rejoin me. Okay, so now you see here the parameters that I'm going to use. I'm making a virtual machine called NixOS, 2 CPUs, 4 gigabytes of RAM, a 10 gigabyte hard drive, and I've supplied the URL, the file path, to that ISO image that we downloaded. Very simple setup. So if I hit enter, I can now press S. No, actually I press R. It asks if the OS is installed. I'm going to say no. That will cause it to boot from the CD, and you can now see it's green. If I hit C, we will connect to this machine, and here we go. We now have the output from the monitor on this machine, and we're immediately put into a boot menu, giving us a variety of different options. We're just going to choose the top option here, NixOS installer. This is 2505. If you're watching this in the future, there might be later versions of NixOS available. So if I hit enter here, it will go ahead and boot us into a very minimal installation environment at the command line. And something to note, if you're not particularly familiar with using the command line, this kind of very basic form of TTY, Alt and the function keys will give you different terminals. So we're currently on Alt F1. For example, on this one, I could open the help, which gives us the entire NixOS manual. This is a good reference. And while I've got this on Alt F1, I could go to Alt F2 and we get another command line, and I could do my actual installation commands here. Alt F1 would take me back to the manual. Arrows will allow me to move the cursor, so I can move the cursor to installing NixOS, press enter, and I can actually read and follow the installation manual right here on the machine as I go. In this case, I'm actually not going to do that. I've got it elsewhere on my machine, so I'm going to follow it kind of off camera, as it were, as we go. So in any case, we're going to go Alt F2 and get a new command line, and the very first thing we have to do is partition our drive. So if we run lsblk, we'll see what drives we have in our machine, and my disk is VDA. Now, of course, in your case, it's going to be something different, so take note of which drive you have. I'm going to run sudo parted, which is the partition editor, /dev, and then / the name of your drive. In my case, it's VDA. So if I run this and I do print, I can see it's a completely unrecognized disk label. This is an entirely blank disk. So for starters, we need to make a label. In my case, it's going to be a GPT label. For almost all modern machines, that's what you're going to make. It is still possible to make old-fashioned MS-DOS style partition tables, but we're not going to do that. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and make a partition with the makepart command, and this will be labeled root. It will be file system type ext4. It will start 1 gigabyte from the start of the drive, because I want to reserve some space for boot, and it will end 1 gigabyte before the end of the drive. If I hit enter, and then I run the print command, you can now see we have partition 1 and it has all those parameters. We're going to do make part again, and this time we're going to label it swap. It's going to be of type Linux-swap, and it's going to begin 1 GB before the end of the drive and take 100% of the remainder of the drive. Enter. That's us. We now have our swap partition. Lastly, we're going to make a partition labeled ESP. This is the boot partition. It'll be of type FAT32. It's going to start 1 megabyte from the beginning of the drive. The first megabyte is reserved, and it will continue until 1 gigabyte on the drive. Go. Lastly, we're going to set some flags. So I'm going to set for partition 3 the flag ESP on. This makes the drive be recognized as a UEFI boot medium, basically. So that will now be possible to boot from. Excellent. Okay, at this stage we can go ahead and quit. That's everything basically set up. Actually, I'm very quickly checking to see if we want to actually set the boot flag for this. Let's double check. We take a little look here. We can see that partition 3 is ESP. Oh, setting ESP on automatically sets the boot flag. Okay, that's the one thing I couldn't remember. Okay, quit. We are done with partitioning. Now we're going to make some file systems. So sudo make file system ext4, and this will be labeled NixOS, and it will be device VDA1 because we made the root partition number 1. Done. Next, we're going to make the swap. So it's sudo make swap. We're going to label it swap, and we're going to make that on device VDA2. Done. Lastly, we're going to make file system FAT. It's going to be of format 32 because it's FAT32. Its name will be boot. For some reason, the parameters are different on this one, and that's device VDA3. Oh, I misspelled it. There you go. An intentional mistake. Excellent. We've made the boot file system now. Fantastic. So we're now going to mount these file systems so that we can begin the installation. So sudo mount device disk by label, and this was labeled, actually was labeled NixOS, not root. And this is going to be mounted to /mount. That's traditionally where you put your file system while you're working with it. Next, we're going to make the boot directory underneath there. Just like that. We now have a boot directory, and now we're going to mount the boot file system. Now for this, we need to supply some extra commands. Don't worry too much about this, just be aware that it's done for reasons of security. So again, it's going to be device disk by label, and in this case, we had a file system labeled boot, and we're going to mount it onto /mount /boot. Lastly, we're going to turn on our swap. That was on device VDA2. Done. We now have swap. Excellent. Okay, so at this stage we have the file systems created and we're ready to begin installation. We would at this point want to supply our configuration.nix if we already had one, if we had a template that we wanted to follow for this machine. I don't. This is a brand new machine for me, so I'm going to run the NixOS generate config command, and I'm going to supply a root of /mount. This will automatically generate a template configuration and a hardware configuration based on my physical machine. Well, in this case, virtual machine. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we want to see. Let's jump into here. So into mount etc NixOS, we'll see that we have these two generated files. We can do sudo nano configuration.nix, and we can now begin configuring our machine before we begin the installation. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to swap out the grub bootloader for systemd boot. I actually prefer that one. We're going to set our hostname. And note that there are lots of commented out lines in this configuration, so the absolute basics are kind of here. Anything additional that you want to add, you can just type in yourself, but we're going to do the minimal installation here, and we'll build upon it in the future. So I'm going to set my time zone. I happen to be in Stockholm. That's set. And then we're going to scroll down. We're not going to set X11 in this case, so we're going to have a completely non-graphical boot. And if you were using a different keyboard layout, you could set it here, but I'm on a US-ish keyboard, so I'm just going to leave it in the default. And then importantly, we want to define our default user. We want an unprivileged user that we'll actually use on this system. By default, the name is Alice. That's a perfectly good name, but I'm going to change it to Deepak. And that will be my user account on this system. We can then scroll all the way down. If there were any other bits and bobs we wanted to enable, we could do it here. Note we've got OpenSSH. I'm going to leave it off. You can disable the firewall. By default, the firewall is on, and it will leave closed any ports that are not specifically configured for system services and the like. That's all fine. We're going to leave all of that at the default. And when we're happy, we're going to do Control-O and press Enter to save that file. And then Control-X will exit the editor. Next, I'm just going to very quickly review the hardware configuration. This is all auto-generated, and importantly, at the top, you'll see that there is an imports section. You can actually take a little look. We'll cover this in a different video, but there is a repository in NixOS of hardware configurations covering a vast number of laptops and other kind of standard computers. So you might want to take a look at those and define them if they apply to your machine. As I said, particularly important with laptops in many cases. We're going to leave it at the default. It's pulling in some QEMU guest settings, which we'll accept, and default kernel modules and so on. Anything that the minimal system detected was needed for this system will be included in here automatically. The other thing that's automatic is the file system entries. This is all automatic as well. And networking, by default, will use DHCP. This means that wired connectivity will work out of the box. If we wanted to do anything with wireless, we'd need some additional configuration, but once again, we'll cover that in a future video. So Control-X drops me out of here. If we're happy with that configuration, we're now ready to begin the installation. So we can simply supply the command sudo NixOS install and press enter. And the system will now begin actually installing. This will take a little bit of time, so I'm going to pause the video here and I'll bring you back when it's done. Okay, you rejoin me. Everything has installed correctly and the bootloader has been set up. The system is now asking me to supply a root password. Now, the NixOS install command has an option to disable the root account. In most cases, I would actually recommend that you do that. You generally don't need a root account for anything. However, we're doing a completely base install, so we are going to supply a root password here, and you can see we got to the point installation finished. Excellent. One last thing that we're going to do before we reboot into our shiny new system is we're going to run the NixOS enter command. This allows us to chroot into our system as if we'd kind of booted it. So I'm going to do that. We supply where the root is, and you can also tell it to just immediately run a command. And in our case, I'm going to do that because, I misspelled that command. I want to set my password for the account Deepak. And it would help if I used the sudo. There we go. So password for Deepak. I'm going to enter that now and type it again. And password was updated successfully. Excellent. At this stage, all we have to do is supply the reboot command and wait. Now, of course, unfortunately, it has taken us into the bootloader again. So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to detach the ISO image there. So what I'll do is I'll power this machine off using that command. I'm going to edit the boot, and I'm going to take out the path to the ISO. So this is, in effect, just like us ejecting the CD. I'll press enter to save. Path was not set. Press any key. That's fine. And then we're going to go ahead and run this virtual machine again. Already installed, I'm going to say yes in this occasion, and I'm going to connect to the machine again, and it's now going to say booting from hard disk. And after a little bit of a delay, we should have our NixOS system. I'll bring you back in just a moment. Okay, now we have the systemd bootloader menu, and by default it's just going to show NixOS. Now in the future, as we refine our configuration and make additional generations, they will appear here. But for now, I'm going to press enter on NixOS and the system will boot. It should boot into a kind of, once again, very minimal text command line setup. Here we go. Let's see if my login works. And it does. Here I am. I'm Deepak, and I'm a member of the wheel group, which means I can issue sudo commands. It basically makes me an administrator. So I can do sudo nano etc nixos configuration.nix, and it's gonna give me the usual warning about using sudo. I type in my password, and here's the same configuration we generated before we did the install. We could now make changes to this configuration, whatever it is that we might like to do. So just as an example of things that we could do, let's actually add a package. So right now we have tree in here. Let's say that we would like to have helix. Let's add helix into there, save it, and exit. And we could now run the command sudo nixOS rebuild switch. And that will generate a new generation of our configuration based on that change. And we could then reboot into that configuration. Let's see what it does here. There we go. And now, well, let's confirm that we don't have helix. Actually, we do have helix because, of course, the switch immediately applies this. So that's us. We now have the helix editor. And if I issue the reboot command, oh, of course, sudo reboot command, it's going to take us here. For some reason, it's taking us to this installer. It's still detecting the CD-ROM drive, but don't worry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into our firmware here and choose miscellaneous device, which is actually the hard drive. And here, this gives us the bootloader we were expecting to see. So generation 1 is what we had after running the installer. Generation 2 is the new generation that I've created, which now has the Helix editor. So there you go. That's the TLDR of how to install NixOS on your computer. Like I said, we're going to cover additional bits and bobs in future videos, but that should be enough to get you started with something that you can play around with. And I recommend diving in this way, whether you do it on a virtual machine or on an old computer, and playing around with the configuration, issuing NixOS rebuild switch commands, and see what you get. Okay, see you next time.